Welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Podcast, episode 71. My name is Alina Warwick, and today we have Gautam Rao on the show. But before we continue with this episode, if you are listening to the show and it brings you value, please share some love by subscribing and leaving a review wherever you're listening to this podcast.
I didn't really have any plans of coming to the US. I did think that I might have to come here for my master's education. And when I got my admission letter into Stanford, it just, became a reality. But I guess since coming here, I haven't looked back. But no, I didn't know at the time that I was going to come to the US because that was one place that we hadn't really spent a lot of time in.
Gautam never imagined that he would end up in the States, but when he applied to study at Stanford, to his surprise, he got in. Gautam's entire family was not by any means entrepreneurs. They all had regular jobs or worked for the government. But Gautam decided that he wanted to do something meaningful in his life and launched his very first startup at 23 years old while he was in Singapore. Gautam had several different startups that he's launched, but now he's an investor. In this episode, we talk about his journey, and he brings an immense amount of value about raising capital. So let's dive right in. Okay, Gautam, thank you so much for coming on the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Podcast. I truly appreciate your time. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alina.
So let's talk about your immigrant journey. Tell us where you're from and when did you come to the United States?
Sure. So I grew up in India and in the UK. So my dad had a job with an airline, and we used to keep moving between the two countries every 3 years. So that was London and Bombay. And then did my undergrad in Singapore. So I spent 4 years for college there and then 3 years working there. Then decided to get into the world of startups. My first startup ended up taking me from Singapore back home to India and down to South America, actually, where I spent a year in Chile as part of their Startup Chile program. While I was there, I got admitted into Stanford for a master's program. So I came up here, and that's where I've been ever since. I've been in the Bay Area ever since. And that's where I started my second and third companies as well.
So what was it like growing up in India, and you said United Kingdom?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. What was it like growing up there?
It was two very different experiences, I guess. It's funny, right? Like when you keep switching between countries, you tend to be an outsider in both places. But I think that it also helped me develop, I guess, skills around making friends very easily wherever I went. And that's helped me wherever I've been. So I'm thankful for that. But I also got exposed to two very different cultures, one developed nation and one rapidly growing country as well. So I think that's influenced some of the things I've done afterwards as well.
So every 3 years, did you have to change schools?
That's right. Yeah, I think by the time I went to college, I'd been in 10 or 11 different schools.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me, your dad worked for what company that allowed him to go in between two countries?
Oh, he was working for Air India, the Indian airline.
Okay, got it. So you guys traveled a lot.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And he was
Okay.
posted in either London or Bombay.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Okay. So growing up, did you always know you were going to end up in United States?
No, I didn't know that actually. I didn't really have any plans of coming to the US. I did think that I might have to come here for my master's education. And when I got my admission letter into Stanford, it just, became a reality. But I guess since coming here, I haven't looked back. But no, I didn't know at the time that I was going to come to the US because that was one place that we hadn't really spent a lot of time in.
Okay. And what did you study in Stanford when you came out to study?
So the degree is called Management Science and Engineering. So it takes classes from both the business side of things as well as the engineering side of things. It's a very customizable degree. So I ended up taking a lot of classes from other schools as well, across computer science, data science, and a couple of other things. And the concentration I did while I was at Stanford was technology and engineering management. I knew I wanted to get into product management or something similar when I graduated, but I guess midway through, I ended up working on my second company instead.
Okay, got it. And did you apply to other universities as well outside of Stanford?
No, that's actually a funny story. So when I started my first company, I was pretty sure that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure, and I saw it all the way through. My dad was of the opinion that I should be applying to schools, just as a backup option. I can't put all my eggs in one basket. So I come from a family where generally like everyone's worked in sort of the public sphere, right? They've either worked in government or in a public sector company. So no one really started a business before that in my family. And what ended up happening was I said, sure, like I'll apply for schools. I ended up applying for one schools because, it was very time consuming doing applications as well as working on a startup. And that school happened to be Stanford. Luckily, I got it.
Wow. So you just applied to one school and that was Stanford.
Yeah.
Lucky you. Look at that. So did you have to take out any scholarships or loans?
No, so after I graduated from my undergrad in Singapore, I worked at Barclays Investment Bank for 3 years. So that
Okay.
was enough for me to help pay off, my Stanford education. So I didn't take any
Oh,
loans or take on any debt.
got it. Okay. So you just practically saved everything you had and then you paid for Stanford just out of cash.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow, that's awesome. You're very, very lucky. Good job. Okay, so how old were you when you came to Stanford?
I was 25, just turning 25, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And so at 25 years old, you are pretty new to this country. And although you've traveled quite a bit, what was that like? What was that journey like in the beginning stages? What kinds of struggles did you have to go through in Stanford in a brand new country?
So I think number one was everyone had told me that, hey, get a credit card on the day you land here because your credit history means everything. So, the only bank that would give me a credit card was Citibank. I think they had some offer for students back then. So
Okay.
that's really helped. The other thing that I guess was very new from a US perspective versus anywhere else was just how much you needed a car to really do anything or go anywhere. I'd been so used to relying on public transport wherever I was. This was one place where I only actually ended up getting my driving license last year, but it was one place where I ended up sort of just staying where I was, in this case, on the Stanford campus, not really venturing out a lot. But I think Stanford that way is a pretty easy place to get integrated into. There's a lot of smart people from, different corners of the world, a pretty open, welcoming atmosphere. So in a sense, it wasn't that hard to, come in and integrate because of kind of environment I was in.
Got it. Okay, so you lived on campus. Did you work on campus as well?
I did some work over the summer on campus. I was working for their energy research labs. We were working on ways to get people to save more energy. That was one project I did, but I then started working at this company, Invoice. So I was an early employee there and then converted to becoming a founder about a month into joining. And that was the only other work I did. I was then at Invoice for the next 3 years.
Okay, so I want to transition to get your journey on your entrepreneurial path. So I'm hearing that while in Stanford, you started another startup, but what was your first startup that you started?
Yeah, so the first one was back in 2013. So, and the reasons for starting this company were very sort of naive, you could say. So I,
That's a good thing.
yeah. So I quit my job at Barclays, after 3 years. It wasn't something that I wanted to continue doing. And I essentially put myself into a very sort of high pressure situation where I had to find a job in Singapore within the next 6 months. Otherwise, my work visa would expire. So
Mhm.
during the course of doing that, I ended up coming across an incubator called the Founder Institute. So I hadn't really thought much about starting a company until then, but I applied on a whim. And while I was applying for other jobs, I went through that program with them where they teach you, the basics of starting a company, how you should think about what ideas to work on. And that created the genesis for my first company, which, we called Zest Buds. At the time, you had companies like Zomato in India and a bunch of others who had started sort of creating restaurant review portals out in India and Southeast Asia. And we
Okay.
wanted to go one step further and capitalize on sort of the photos of food that people had started taking and posting on Instagram. And we wanted to go one step further and, tell you what exactly you should order, at whichever restaurant you went to. And sort of the broader vision for that was, regardless of your diet, like you should be able to find where you can actually find a meal that fits your diet.
Wow, that's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, so that company came out of the Founder Institute, and my co-founder, who was also from Barclays, quit Barclays shortly after and joined, and he brought on a friend of his who became our CTO from India. So we then worked on it for about a year and a half, starting the journey in Singapore. We went back to India. The goal was to launch it in India.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, we'd applied to a bunch of accelerator programs for funding. We got into one in Chile. So we came down to Chile, and the Chilean government basically gives you a grant to build your company in the country and then launch it there. So we launched a private beta over there to sort of the local entrepreneurial community, 1,000+ users. We got a lot of good feedback and traction, but one hurdle we ran into, given our size, was how difficult it was to get menu data from restaurants, which is, was still a very manual, operationally intensive process. And at that time, I also had an admission letter from Stanford. So, I was weighing whether to continue with this or come up to the Bay Area, and I eventually chose the latter.
Got it. And so how old were you when you launched that company?
I was 23. Yeah.
Wow, super young. Good job. And you said that your parents, they were government workers. So you were the very first one in your family to kind of have the entrepreneurial drive. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. As far as I know, I don't know how far, if you go back
Yes.
much further in my family, I'm not sure. But yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah. And so where do you think that comes from? Is it just you didn't like being 9 to 5 worker? You never wanted to have a boss? Or where do you think that came from for you?
So while I was at Barclays, life was pretty comfortable. I was earning well. The work was, relatively straightforward. But I think one thing that I really missed after 3 years of being there was sort of meaning and purpose to what I was doing. I wanted what I was doing to be something that had impact. And what caused that change in mindset was, I'd spent a month in Nepal back in 2012 after undergoing a bunch of health issues. And what I was doing there was I was working with an orphanage and with kids over there. And I realized that, whatever work I wanted to do after coming back to Singapore, has to have sort of more meaning and impact to it. I couldn't just be sort of building systems for banking, was my thought process at the time. When I quit Barclays, my goal wasn't to really start a company, but was to join a more impactful organization. But I ended up taking the entrepreneurial route, and I haven't looked back since.
Got it. Okay. So just kind of situational when you were in Singapore, you mentioned that you had to figure something out because your visa was expiring and you quit because you wanted to find a more meaningful purpose in life and you launched your very first company at 23 years old.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I love it. So tell me what happened next. Your second company was launched. Was that during Stanford when you were studying here?
Yeah, so while I was studying here, I joined a company over the summer called Invoice. I had gotten in touch with them because the founder had reached out to me a couple of months ago to ask about the Startup Chile program that I'd gone through with my first company. And I ended up joining them, and the goal was just to join them for the summer. I was working on the business development side. But by the end of the summer, the CEO had made me an offer to stay and wanted to make me a founder as well. So I ended up taking on the secondary co-founder role and CTO and head of product. So it was quite a transition from the biz dev work I was doing earlier. I hadn't built a product from scratch before, but it was quite a trial by fire situation, I guess. We had a couple of months of runway left. So I'll tell you what we were building. We were building a marketplace for small business invoice financing at the time.
Okay.
So small businesses, they have invoices from the customers they work with. And they generally have a lot of small businesses end up supplying or selling to larger companies like Walmart and Amazon. And these companies then pay these small businesses back in 60, 90, 120 days later. So in the meantime, these small business owners are going through cash flow issues, right? They don't have the cash they need to actually pay for supplies or pay their employees. So they then turn to lenders. But what had happened in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis was that lending standards had tightened considerably. Many small business owners were kind of locked out of that. They then had to turn to other lenders who were charging them sort of much higher rates for these very short-term loans against these invoices. So we wanted to create a marketplace where we connected these small businesses with investors on the other side. The investors still got a grade for very low risk because you know that Amazon's going to pay the small business back in 60 days. It's just that the small business needs money now. And for the small business, they were getting a better rate from anywhere else. So that's what we were building. We had a few months of runway left. We had a bunch of customers coming to our platform, but most of the stuff happening on the back end was still manual. We were still using spreadsheets and all that to figure out the rate and manage the loans and all that. So I had to build an end-to-end product. The first thing we built was an originations platform. So normally a small business owner would have to fill out reams of paperwork. It'll take a week, 2 weeks at a bank or at a lender to actually get the loan. But we essentially shortened that whole paperwork collection process to sort of less than half an hour. They filled out a form. We integrated with all of the major accounting platforms with their bank account. And all of their data was pulled in automatically. So that was the first piece of software we built. And the product we built started getting attention from some of the accounting platforms we'd integrated with, particularly Sage in the UK, who wanted to partner with us and potentially acquire us down the road. But that didn't go through. And then we really had only 2 months of runway left, and that's when we pivoted to becoming a SaaS company. So we built this entire end-to-end platform for ourselves. We started to sell it to existing lenders in the market as white label software. And that proved to be a really good move for us from a revenue and profit standpoint. Within a year, we were making $1 million in ARR.
And then we were talking offline. You mentioned you guys had over $1 billion in the loan volume processed. And was that in the beginning stages, or where did you guys see that traction come through?
So when we were marketplace ourselves, one of the hurdles we ran through was acquiring small businesses is a pretty difficult process. Small businesses are pretty heterogeneous. It's a very fragmented market. Right? Small business owners aren't necessarily talking to other owners. So you don't get word of mouth organic growth like you see in sort of consumer startups. So customer acquisition costs were pretty high. But when we switched to SaaS, all we were doing was we were going to these conferences and then selling the SaaS software to other lenders in the space. And these lenders were then paying us, a fair amount of money. So once we switched to that, and these lenders were then taking care of interfacing with the small business themselves, within about a year and a half after that switch to becoming a SaaS player, we essentially crossed that mark.
Okay. And did you guys have to raise any capital for Finvoice?
Yeah, we did. So by the time I left the company in mid-2018, we raised about $1.5 million, mostly from angels, some from Lightspeed Scout Fund, and from the accelerators we'd gone through. So there was Stanford StartX, there was NFX Guild, there was Lease FinTech Accelerator.
And what about your first company when you launched it when you were in Singapore? Did you have to raise any capital?
We didn't have to raise any capital. So we did get on some pretty great advisors who wanted to put in capital based on certain milestones we went through. But that company was, besides Startup Chile, was bankrolled by what I'd saved from Barclays.
Okay, so it was eventually like low startup cost and low expenses, so you were able to cash flow that business.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so what happened after Finvoice?
Yeah, so I left Invoice in 2018. I started talking to a friend of a friend who was also in the Bay Area. He'd sold a company in the past, and we'd both been thinking about sort of different ideas to work on, and one that really stuck with us. So he's also an immigrant, actually, was to build software for helping people immigrate easily. And we'd both gone through our own shares of ups and downs with the visa process. We knew that there was a demand for sort of skilled people, especially in tech, but at the same time, sort of the major hurdles were companies couldn't really hire international people easily, while for skilled workers, getting through that visa hurdle was a big pain as well. So our initial idea was to basically find these sort of really skilled people in different parts of the world and then connect them with companies in our initial pilot market, which was Canada. We started with Canada because they have a very transparent, easy to work with immigration system, and companies there are also pretty open to hiring foreign workers. So that's what we started with. We raised money from Sequoia Scout Fund, from a bunch of other good investors to start off with.
How much money did you guys raise?
It was a very small round. We raised around less than 300K, enough to get us started, basically.
Okay.
And we went through a bunch of different pivots. That first model of sort of connecting workers to companies was good, but it was also our vetting process to find these people was pretty strict. It was very difficult to fill the top of our funnel with really great sort of skilled employees So
Hmm.
we then pivoted to a sort of self-service model where, rather than hand holding both sides of the table, we allowed companies to advertise job openings on our platform. We provided people on the other end of the platform with all the tools and resources they needed to go through the visa process themselves to find a job that fit their profile. And of course, like, our marketplace was doing some matchmaking as well. And we then added sort of other service providers to the platform. So if they wanted to work with a lawyer, they could do that. We then matched them with a lawyer as well. So the idea was that the grand vision, so to speak, was that an immigrant would come to our platform. He'd
Hmm.
be able to find a job in a foreign country. In this case, we were looking at US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Denmark, Netherlands, and eventually we wanted to add the US as well. So they'd be able to find a job in a foreign country, through sort of the tools and the software we'd built. They'd be able to go through the visa process themselves, either with a lawyer they found through our platform or through the self-service platform we'd built. And once they landed in their country of destination, we'd line them up with a phone number. We'd help them find a place to rent. So it was like a full service, from start to end immigrant journey, right? We wanted to make it really easy for people to move, like remove all of these artificial hurdles that otherwise exist.
Wow, that's a genius model. Wow.
Yeah, we eventually got to a place where, what we built was making a sort of consistent revenue on a month to month basis. But both my co-founder and I, we couldn't foresee a venture scalable model here. It was because of the entire process of scaling this was very difficult. So we both decided to move on to other things. I ended up joining this company out in India. My visa actually expired in 2019, so I had to go back. So it was a Stanford StarX company. They were building the Credit Karma equivalent for India. He went on to do other things as well. But while we worked on it, like, we were both pretty inspired by what we were working on.
So why do you say it was pretty hard to scale it?
It's hard to scale it when you're looking from a venture investor perspective, right? They're looking at you getting 10% growth either week on week or month on month. And while we were growing, like, we weren't growing that fast. So we knew we needed to raise more money, but if we raised more money, we'd then have to adhere to these deadlines and milestones, and the company would have died anyway. So we realized that, like, despite everything we tried from a growth perspective, we didn't see venture scalable growth in this business. It was definitely a very, very solid lifestyle business, and the platform
Yeah.
continued to generate revenue for a while, but it wasn't a venture scalable business.
Got it. You couldn't go super big. You could have scaled a little bit,
Yeah,
but in order to raise capital, the investors were like, this is too small.
yeah, that's right.
Got it. Yeah. Because I'm thinking there's so many immigrants, at least in America, and there's so many immigrants everywhere else. So typically anything immigrant related is so, so hot and everyone's jumping on it because this seems like a very useful and helpful resource for all immigrants that come, to get their visa situated. You guys had lawyers on there. It was like a really neat platform, kind of like a one-stop shop. So
Yeah.
I'm surprised to hear that it wasn't scalable to the investor side.
There was definitely no shortage of demand, but where the
Yeah.
real hurdle was that, you can't really separate the issue of immigration from finding a job. Unfortunately, like, in most places, like, you being in that country is contingent on you having a paying job. And once you sort of narrow down the extremely high demand from immigrants to people who actually end up finding that job through the platform, and that also
Uh-huh.
requires buy-in from companies on the other side, right? Then
Mhm.
then the numbers you're talking about are much smaller.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Okay. So I wanted to go back to the transition from Finvoice. Did you quit that company and then started Pursuit, or was there a transition?
There was a very brief transition, as in my Pursuit co-founder and I had been discussing, had been bouncing ideas off of each other for about 3 or 4 months at that point before I decided to jump ship.
Okay. So how was that transition like for you? Was it scary to start something brand new, fresh, and you've already been working on this project for a couple of years now. It was like 2 years, I believe, right?
Yeah,
And
three
now
years. Yeah.
3 years. Okay, quitting and starting something completely brand new. Were you scared or you were fired up? What was that like for you?
I guess a bit of both. Finvoice until that point had been my sort of complete focus, right? So to leave something that I'd been so heavily invested in was pretty difficult. But at the same time, the timing was right. Like I think what my new co-founder, Pursuit co-founder proposed was pretty exciting. I was also at that point, I guess, verging on the brink of burnout, putting
Mm.
in nights and weekends, and I knew I needed something fresh.
Okay, so after Pursuit, what happened next?
Yeah, so after we jointly made the decision to sort of not continue on Pursuit,
Uh-huh.
I ended up joining this company called My Money Karma. So the CEO of that was essentially an mentor and advisor at StartX. So that's how I knew him. StartX is Stanford's accelerator, and he started this company to build sort of the Credit Karma equivalent for India. So India, for context, was introduced to sort of credit scores and all about 15 years ago. And credit scores were now used to make decisions on who to lend to, how much to lend, what rate to set, and all of that. So
Hmm.
we were essentially building a one-stop sort of financial services platform for users to come to our website and then be connected with the financial product they needed, whether it was a personal loan or a home loan or whatever it was. And there was a very large sort of financial education component to it as well. Most users sort of entering the Indian middle class didn't have the knowledge they needed regarding most of these products. So it was a big educational component. The mission was really good, and it was pretty fun to work on some of the products there.
So that was a job.
I joined
Mhm.
as the director of product engineering there. Yeah, that was a job.
Okay, okay, got it. And so you were there for less than a year and then you jump ship again.
So that was for a completely different reason. So I was there, and then while I was there, the pandemic hit. So I was in India, and my wife was here. So I didn't have a work visa in the US, so I couldn't bring my job here. So after a
Okay.
couple of months of being separated from her, and she was all alone, I quit my job and came back here. And that's when I decided to transition to the other side of the table and start exploring investing.
Got it. Okay, so and what did you do with your visa? Your visa expired. Did you find a sponsor or what did you do with your visa situation?
Oh, so when I came back here, I was on my spouse's dependent visa. So I didn't have work authorization, but I basically used that time to explore the investing side of things and, take on sort of board roles with different startups and all of that.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to talk about that as well because there are a lot of immigrant entrepreneurs that have been on my show and our listeners that are looking to raise some capital. So now that you are an investor, how was that transition like for you? And tell me a little bit about that journey. So, what do you guys look for when you guys invest in all of these startups? So what are some tips that you can bring to our listeners? So let's hear a little bit about that.
Sure. In terms of what investors look for, it's very, very dependent on the firm and if you're talking to an individual, on the investor as well. So most investors have different kinds of have different theses about where the world is headed, depending on their own personal experiences and their career experiences. So my background until that point had primarily been in fintech and SaaS. So I had a pretty strong thesis around how the underserved, and this was again like coming from my work both at Invoice and at My Money Karma and working with the sort of really bright people at Pursuit as well,
Mhm.
was how there was this gigantic underserved unbanked group of people both in the United States and the rest of the world were going to come within the financial fold in the next 10 15, 20 years, and this was a huge opportunity, right? So I started looking for companies in that space. During the course of it, I realized that a lot of things that I looked at, and again, this depends on the investor you're speaking to, right? I was looking
Mhm.
at things from a product and engineering lens. That had been my experience so far. So I'd say keep that in mind, right? So do your background research on the person you're speaking to. Look at the roles that he's held in the past before he was an investor, and then you'll know sort of what angle he or she is looking at the company you're presenting. So when I go and talk to someone, like the number one thing that's important to me is that do I think that this technology or this product has potential? So I'm looking at it both from, hey, is there a large market for this either now or in the future? Are users going to enjoy using this? Is this technology sort of groundbreaking or revolutionary, and will it change the way that things are done. So those are some of the things that I look at, but different investors look at different things.
What about like envisioning like a boardroom full of investors and there's a couple of people that come in and pitch their products or service? What is that process like? What do people go through? What is on their side? What do they expect when, raising a seed round or going through YC or, trying to find capital for their businesses?
Yes. So at the very start of the journey, right, as a founder, you can either reach out to investors who you think might be interested in what you're building. And there's certainly a lot of inbound, or, you have venture scouts or venture partners who are actively looking for companies that fit whatever funds ethos they're working with and sourcing those companies themselves from their own network. So it's still a very personal, network driven process more than anything else.
Closed group. Yeah.
I suppose so, yeah. But once you're through that, right, then there's a pretty standard due diligence process. You have an introductory call with the founder. You find out, all of the high level stuff about the company, and the four main things that you're looking to answer are, well, five main things. Is the team good enough? Like, even if this idea doesn't work, do they have, either the chops or the resources to do something else, to pivot? You're looking at market, which is probably the most important indicator. Is the market big enough now or later? Looking at their current business model and what future business models they could potentially explore to see if the business will be viable either now or in the future. And then the last, actually the least important thing for an early stage company is probably product. Product is important. Product market fit is more important, but product is something that evolves over time. So you're looking more at whether they've taken the right steps so far in building what they have. What's their process like around determining what features to put in, what product to build? Is it sort of founder led, or are they actively listening to their customers, for example? And once you find that out, then there's sort of more back and forth to uncover more data, to uncover any risks and concerns that might exist. And then the founder comes in for a pitch once there's one level of approval.
Okay. And so do the founders need to have some stable income, some stable revenue coming in for a period of time, or can they come in at the very, very early stage of a company?
So it depends on the kind of company, right? So if it's a consumer focused company, then the key metric you're looking at is growth. Is this something that's going to be insanely popular, or is this something that a lot of people are going to use? Monetization can be figured out later on, but if it's a B2B company or a SaaS company, then revenue is a more important metric, because that's a key validation of whatever they're building. Like, it then looks like businesses and enterprises actually want what they're building. So it's pretty important there. But companies can come in at the very early stage when they don't have any revenue, but the likelihood of getting funding at that point is low unless they show some sort of traction when it comes to B2B SaaS companies.
Awesome. And on the investor side, where does the money come from? Does the investor have to pull in their own cash, liquid cash to the table, or is there like a pool of money that you guys can pull from?
Sure, yeah. So there's essentially three different kinds of investing, I guess. So there's your
Okay.
individual angel investors who are investing their own money.
Hmm.
They're doing it for personal reasons. Since they're using their own money, they can determine what sort of risk and return they want. Then there are angel syndicates where you're not really sort of relying on a separate pool of money, but you have a bunch of angels coming together, acting as one, investing as a single line on the founder's cap table. So it looks like a venture fund is investing in it, but it's really a bunch of angels who pool their money together. One angel in this group is essentially taking the lead and doing the due diligence and telling the other angels, hey, this deal looks great. Let's bring our money together and then invest. And then the third, the most conventional model, which most VCs follow, is these VCs themselves are invested in by what's called an LP or a limited partner. So these are generally, wealthy family offices, pension funds, banks, big companies. So they've given the managing partners of the venture fund some money, telling them that, hey, go invest for the next 10 years. That's the horizon most venture funds generally have. And we're expecting XYZ. And the partners in the whole fund are then paying themselves from a certain percentage of the money they've raised from these wealthier institutions. And they're looking to return a certain percentage to the LPs and, of course, keep a certain percentage for themselves.
Okay. And the third option you're saying that is more standard and more popular these days?
It's not more popular these days, but it's how a conventional venture fund works. So if you
Okay.
go to most venture firms, that's how they work. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that's very interesting to know that, in order to be an investor, you don't necessarily have to bring in your pool of cash to start investing in these new startups and contributing to these huge innovations that are coming up in the market. So I think that's great. That's a really great model. So, where are you at? Are you in A, B, or C?
I mostly spent the last couple of months figuring out whether this is sort of the track that I want to go down. I guess the most important thing to remember as an investor is the founder are the most important people, right? So I've been helping out a bunch of companies with advice based on my own career and experiences. And I've been figuring out like where my sort of sweet spot lies. So like I mentioned, I tend to look at things from a product and engineering standpoint. Most of the
Mhm.
companies that I tend to be interested in are playing in the B2B or fintech verticals. I've also looked at a lot of clean tech deals. Because of my background and upbringing, I actually get to see a lot of startups from other parts of the world. So India, Southeast Asia, where I've spent time, Latin America, and Africa. So that's something that continues to be of interest, sort of investing in emerging market companies. But I'm also looking at investing in companies run by other immigrants in the US as well.
I love it. Immigrant entrepreneurs listening, they're going to love that as well.
Yeah.
So, Gautam, did you have any mentors that helped you out to start any of your businesses?
Yeah, so my first company back in Singapore, where I knew very little about what I was doing, I had a very good advisor and mentor for that company, and we still keep in touch today. He's been helping me figure out how to be a better investor as well. So he's actually out in New Zealand, so we keep in touch.
Oh, okay. And do you think that is something important for immigrant entrepreneurs to obtain or to find some really good mentors to help them out in their journeys?
Oh yeah, I think it's super important. So you can do the journey on your own, but you'll end up making a lot of mistakes on the way. And something that takes you 10 years without having a good mentor could take you 3 years with a good mentor, because you will avoid a lot of the missteps and you'll find new mistakes to make that even the mentor hasn't made. So I definitely say that
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot to be gained from having a calm, steady mentor who can help you with the ups and downs.
And where do you recommend finding these mentors? Plugging into like networking groups or getting out there and going to events, or are there any other ideas?
I think all of those are good ideas, but it's difficult to sort of build a relationship from zero. So,
Yeah.
where you actually have some shared context with the potential mentor is if you join an accelerator program, right? So, most of these accelerator programs have in house mentors and advisors and investors that are part of their broader network. And you then have a sort of ready made reason to meet and talk to them. So, that's where I think you can really build, a stronger mentee relationship.
Got it. So, so powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, Gautam, how do you reinvest in yourself to keep up to date with your industry? I see that you're on board with a couple of different companies, partnering up, investing in a couple of different companies currently, but how do you reinvest in yourself? Are you always constantly reading fintech news or CNN? What are some of the things that you do to keep up to date?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily read just pure fintech stuff. So I actually believe that if you read pretty widely, I think you're going to come across some more creative insights that you can apply to other industries. So by looking at a wider swathe of startups or by reading some very different things, I think you end up coming up with new insights versus sort of rehashing some of the stuff you've already read. I do tend to read fintech only news just to understand the industry better more than anything else. But
Mhm.
otherwise, I don't, and it's too early to say whether it's working or not. But I do tend to read very widely. So I've subscribed to a bunch of different things based on what I'm interested in. And whenever I'm talking to a startup or to a founder, I find that having read so many different things, I'm able to offer them with a wider perspective and with the things they may not have thought of. Another important thing I think is it's very easy to get caught up in sort of the day to day and sort of sending emails all the time or just scheduling meetings all the time. So what I've started to do recently is just sort of scheduling some blank time for myself so I can process some of the stuff I've read or the conversations I've had, and hopefully that'll make me help me be more insightful with the next conversation I have or the next person that I speak to.
That is fabulous advice. And the reason why I say that is because a couple of people on my show have said, I don't just read the books on like business or on my industry. I read anything and everything that I can grab my hands on because you're totally right. That's how we continue to be creative. That's how we can elaborate on anything that we talk about. And we can grab little pieces from here and there on whatever it is that we're reading. But the most important thing, like you mentioned, is reading. Reading is so, so powerful. And we never, never stop learning in this entrepreneurial journey in order for us to continue to grow, expel, and propel us to go forward. So Gautam, I gotta ask you, what's next for you? Are you planning to start any new businesses? Are you gonna stick around to be on the investor side?
For the time being, I'm thinking of being on the investor side, but I don't think I'll be starting anything new for a couple of years at least. Want to gain a bit more experience either working at a larger company and understanding the late stage side of things or continuing down the investing path, either by joining a fund a couple of months down the line or by sort of starting my own fund. Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best in that journey, but I wanted to switch gears and I wanted to talk a little bit about mistakes or failures. So, you've launched a couple of startups and some of them have shut down. So, how do you move forward with that? I hear a lot of people can just, give up. They start something and they say, well, that's not for me. So, I'm going to go back and get myself a job, or, it was never meant to be, but you're continuing to be on the entrepreneurial path. So, what are some things that you've implemented that make you go forward?
Yeah, in terms of what helps me go forward, right? So I'm not a very organized person, but I think what helps me with staying sort of grounded and seeing things in perspective, even after a failure or mistake, is two things, I guess. So one is I make sure I have a set of things I do every day to take care of myself.
Hmm.
So that ranges from meditating in the morning to doing, going through an exercise routine to actually reading something for sort of pleasure rather than work. That's something that happens every day. And then I know that, as long as that's in my control, then the rest of the day feels within control, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, is having a good, strong support system, right? Make sure that I was guilty of not really doing this during my Invoice time, where it almost resulted in burnout. But I make sure that once the day ends, and I make sure to have like a set time, the working day ends every day, then I switch to something else, right? I'm spending time with my wife, calling my parents, sort of messaging my friends. And I think that really helps put things in perspective, right? It can be very, very easy to let sort of all your career mistakes and failures define you as a person. But if you have a very clear separation, you realize that's just one half of the story.
Absolutely. And then if we look at the, successful people in the world, they've got tons of mistakes and tons of failures. So just if something didn't work out during that time or during that phase, we cannot give up. We have to go forward because as immigrants, coming to America is a success on its own.
100%. I completely agree with that. I think, in the moment, like a mistake or failure can feel pretty painful, but once you go through a couple of them, I think you start developing a thicker skin, I guess, and you start seeing things as a third person would do, right? So, like, I always tell myself, like, stand outside your thoughts and feelings and observe things like you're someone else. Like, if a friend goes through a mistake or failure, you're going to be consoling, but most people aren't the same way towards themselves. So, I think it's important to have that perspective.
Yeah, and I'm sure meditating helps tremendously with that
Yeah,
because you're
that's
just, your mind gets grounded in your present space. So I'm sure meditating has some powerful effects in moving forward.
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Awesome. So, Gautam, what does the American dream mean to you?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think for me, the American dream means pursuing opportunity, right? I think no other country does it as well as over here. Like, where if you have, something that you want to work on, this is probably the best place to do that. So, I think the conventional American dream is having the big house, the big car, and being well settled. But I think for me, like the real American dream is having the freedom to pursue what you want to work on.
Can anyone reach their American dream?
I think so. There's definitely like hurdles for different people. I mean, ranging from immigrants to people from more diverse communities. But I think those can be overcome either with support or with self belief. I think self belief is pretty important.
Yes, so true. I love it. And so, what are some things you would advise the next aspiring immigrant that wants to start their own business?
So I'd say that there's probably a couple of things. So one is make sure that you have a stable foundation to build on, either financially or otherwise. That allows you to actually take more risks. Like when you're personally hurting, that's when you want to fold. But that's also when a big opportunity is just around the corner. So make sure you have that foundation, you have enough runway personally to see out a bunch of ideas, because it's never going to be the first idea, the first product you launch that's going to work. So you do need enough time to actually get to reasonable success. The other really important thing is that in this day and age when everyone is starting a company, and it's very tempting to start a company for the sake of it. But I'd say that, again, maybe this is just important to me personally, but I'd say that start something that you're either very interested in or that you personally find meaningful, because again, like what matters for startup success is, being able to have enough time to iterate through a bunch of different ideas and through a bunch of different products. So, I definitely say that if you are working on something that's important to you or interesting to you, you're gonna stick with it longer.
Yes, so powerful. I love ending the show with starting a company that's meaningful to you and pursuing your dreams. So, Gautam, thank you so much for coming on the Immigrant Entrepreneurs podcast. And I know it's going to inspire so many people listening, and especially raising capital as well. So, I truly appreciate your time, and I'm honored to share your journey. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elena.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If there are any links that were mentioned in this episode, make sure to check them out on my website under this episode to find all the links conveniently located in the show notes. I just wanted to ask for a quick favor. If you could please leave a review wherever you're at listening to this podcast. Also, if you're an immigrant entrepreneur and would love to be on my podcast, please email me and we'll get connected. I'll see you guys all next time for another exciting and impactful episode. Take care.